Hey guys, Miss Warren here. I'm going to go through painting my still life. So earlier I did a practice run here on my smaller sheet of paper. Sorry guys, I'm adjusting the lighting here so I get a good lighting, can see what I'm doing. So I did a practice run on my smaller sheet here. So I'm going to show y'all I'm going to be painting and talking about a few tips and tricks as I go along. So let me go ahead and open up my photo that I took to reference for my still life here so I can look at the colors. Now, I have a choice whether to keep the colors the same or if I want to change them up a little bit along the way. Generally, I'm going to start with the objects that are closest to me. So the first things I'm going to paint in are the skull and the shell. I'm probably going to work back and forth because I'm going to paint a base color, kind of let it dry a little bit. Then I'm going to paint a couple layers on top. So if you see here, I painted this base color. And then I did some lighter shadows, and then I waited for them to dry, and then I did darker shadows over the top and just increased the shadows on this. Now, if you don't want to worry about color, you just want to worry about how dark or light it is, and you want to choose your own colors, you can always edit your colors in your phone. So you can change whether you want them warmer or cooler. If you have an Apple device, you can go in and edit whether they're brighter or darker, more vivid. You can do the highlights, increase the highlights and the shadows. Oh yeah, I like it with the darker shadows, that looks cool. The contrast, the brightness of the whole thing. I'm gonna up the brightness a little bit so you can see that seashell. And you can change the saturation. You can make it black and white, so you're not really worried about the colors, you're just worried about the textures, or you can make it really intense if you wanted to copy something kind of really intense there. So you can kind of play with your colors. I think I might look at it a little more intensely, and then if I want to change it, I can change it a little bit. So I'm gonna start with the skull. I'm going to, my palette's pretty messy here. Some other students have used it. So I'm gonna clean up the top lid here. So I have some space to mix my colors because I don't wanna mix up the colors in there because I don't wanna mess those up. But I'm gonna clean up this top area. Just get a little water on my paper towel and wipe out the area. So I have some space to mix tertiary colors or neutral tones. Okay. So that skull is has a little bit of green in it. So I'm going to get some water. And I'm gonna put a few drops of water in my green. And it has some yellow in it. I wanna put a few drops of water in the colors I'm gonna use while my water and my brush are clean. It will just make it easier. So I'm gonna go through and put a few drops of water in each color. I probably won't use black. I really don't like using black in most of my artworks. I'd rather use a complementary color to neutralize it, and I like to use like purples and blues for my shadows. So I don't use a lot of black when I paint. Oh, and this on my hand is just paint. I ran out of room in my palette up here, so I started mixing paint on my hand, so that's not actually a bruise, that's just mixing a color of paint back there. Okay, so I'm gonna mix a kind of a greenish yellow for the skull, because if I really look at that skull, it looks kind of yellow-green. So I'm gonna put a little bit of yellow in this lid. And it's okay that this lid, you probably can't see it up there, but it's okay that this lid isn't perfectly clean because it's kind of a muddy yellow-green. In fact, I'm gonna pick up some of this kind of dirty green here to kind of make this neutral yellow color. Yellow-green. Grab a little more yellow. I don't want to try to get any of that green in there. So there we go. There's a kind of a gray-green. I'm going to rinse out my brush really good. I think I might pick up some yellow but I'm gonna get a lot of water in my brush because I don't want it bright yellow. And I'm gonna go over most of where the skull is at. So get kind of a, as I go, I'm gonna paint that area. Get a little more color in there. And I'm gonna worry about the shadows second. I'm gonna get a little more yellow in this brush, yeah. It's okay if I go a little bit brighter than natural. And it's okay if I paint over. The only things I don't want to paint over are the areas that I want stark white. This is my base, my lightest color. If I was going to keep any of this super white, then I wouldn't paint on it. I can paint over this area because I'm going to paint a darker color over there, and it will kind of cover this yellow a little bit. So now if I want a clean line, I'm going to wait for this to dry. But if I don't mind it bleeding a little bit, like this area here has a kind of greenish shadow, and it kind of bleeds into the rest of it. So I'm actually going to get a little bit of a kind of a dark yellow, green, neutral color. And while it's still wet, I'm gonna start putting that right here. Kind of get that shadow around the edges. And I'm gonna do another layer over here. I'm probably gonna do some purple shadows over here, but I'm gonna get a little bit of green in there. Color in my brush. See, I'm leaving these little edges of the skull here because this is reflecting the light. You can see the light kind of reflected. I'm going to put a little bit more on the inside here. And then you have the inside of the nose is in shadow too. And I'll go back with another layer and make that even darker. And the teeth, get the shadows on the teeth. And this little cavity of the cheek is pretty dark too. Put a texture in there. I'm gonna get this eye socket is pretty dark. So you notice as I paint, the paper starts to wrinkle a little bit. Now, one thing you can do is if you have a board, you can tape with painter's tape the edges of your paper down. Otherwise, we'll just kind of, as we work with the paper and we get it more wet, it will start to flatten out a little bit. And you can put a little water on the back side of the paper and that will help it flatten out too. But I'm not gonna worry about that too much now. Get a little bit of the shadows and the texture in here. Now I'm gonna start, I'm gonna grab a smaller brush. Now you can do everything with this little brush, but if you notice, I started the big area with a big brush. Now I'm gonna start working in with a smaller brush. Now you can do little details with the tip of the brush, especially if you have the one that came with the palette. You can do the details with that very tip of the brush, and you can turn it on its side to do big areas. And I'll show you all that with the box here. So I'm gonna start with this, I'm gonna do the top section of this box just for an example here. I'm gonna mix myself like a kind of neutral yellow brownish color for that box. That's a little bit too, mixing it in the lid here. If you want to make a gold neutral yellow color, you get yellow and you mix the tiniest dot of purple in it to kind of make it a goldish brown color. So I'm going to, I can use the side of my brush to cover a large area like this. Grab a little more paint. And then if I want more detail, like the little darker stripes in there, I can go in the tip of my brush and kind of run my brush through here to get like the thin lines and details. So if I hold it more vertically, you get a finer line. If I hold it more horizontally, you get a broader line. And if I press harder, you get a darker line. And if you press more light, you get this finer line here. I'm gonna use the tip of this brush to start creating some texture in here. This is pretty wet, so it's kind of bleeding out into the other colors. Slowly build up the shadow. I'm probably gonna build up a little bit of this brown color here, and then I'll probably do some purple for the deepest shadows once we get rolling. Get a little bit of purple because I think this area is pretty dark, so it's ready to be layered with some purple. Okay, so to build up these shadows, layering is important, kind of putting down a base coat, then going over it again to make those shadows darker and darker each time. And you want to do it, not just leave each area a plain solid color. You want to make the different colors and values by layering up. If you want a hard line, if you want clean lines, wait till that area dries. If you want to bleed and kind of mix the color, do it while it's still wet. Get a little bit of dark purple in there to do the second eye socket here. Get the, because that's one of the darkest points. I might wait for that to dry, especially on the nose there, and do yet another layer because it's pretty dark in there compared to the rest of it. These teeth are pretty dark too, so I can kind of go around them. Okay, so there's some basic kind of building up and layering. I will probably do a speed paint recording of the rest of this and just overlay music for it. I just kind of wanted to show y'all and point out the layering. You start with your lightest color, you work to your darker colors. If you want it pure white, you leave the paper alone. I normally start with the objects that are closest and work my way back when working with watercolor. And then you want to do the background last and kind of get right up near the edge of the other objects. You want to cover just about all of the paper except for what is supposed to be pure white. So that's it for today. I look forward to seeing your work, and I'm excited to see how these turn out. Bye.